but God. So in a minute, if you carry nothing else away from this message, I want you to carry two words, but God.
And the patriarchs, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him and delivered him out of all of his troubles and gave him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and made him governor over Egypt and all his house. There's two words here that I want you to see, two words that I want you to grab a hold of, and they are this, in verse 9, but God. Two of the most important words you will ever hear, but God was with him.
God delights in taking the foolish and the weak and the underdog and the downcast and raising them up and doing mighty things through their life. That way he gets all the glory.
Joseph is in that Egyptian prison for several years. He's had nothing but a hard way to go, thrown into circumstances beyond his control. And then we find those two beautiful words, but God.
But God means the world doesn't get the last word on who you are or who you can become or what you might do. Your GED, your SAT scores, your divorced home, unwanted, orphan, has no bearing whatsoever with what God can do for you and do with you. None at all. In fact, the worse off you are, the more glory he gets when he does something wonderful with you.
Those two words that can change everything. Those two words that can turn impossibilities into possibilities. Those two words that made all of the difference in Joseph's life. But God. But God was with him. The odds were against him, but God. His dreams could never come to pass, but God. God delivered him out of all of his troubles, gave him favor, gave him wisdom, and took him from the bottom and put him on the top. And you could lose hope, except for two words, but God.
Those two words, that's what I want you to remember. For every battle in your life in this season, for every cross in your life in this season, for every struggle in your life in this season, for every setback in your life, for every question in your life, for every unanswered prayer in your life in this season, for every thorn in your flesh in this season, for every limp in your hip this season, I want you to remember, but God.
It excites me to find out that I can be bigger than who I was when I was born or whatever happened to me. Of course we're not smart enough. Of course we're not resourced enough. Of course we're not strong enough. And of course none of us are good enough. But God has chosen the foolish, the weak, the lowly, and the meek, and the timid, and the too shy, and the too loud, and the not very polished, and the not very accomplished, and the not very connected, so that whatever is going on in your heart or in your job or with your family or with your money or with your children or with your health, and it looks really, really bad, remember, but God. That phrase gets used over and over and over in the Bible. Joseph said it to his brothers who, for crying out loud, sold him into slavery. Years later, when he understood what happened from a different perspective, he said to them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good."
Only two words you need.
Two words that are woven into some stories in the Bible that you could overlook them if you're not careful, and yet those words change everything.
You could do a whole study on every time that it says, but God in the Bible, and you'd be blessed. Abraham was 75 years old and his wife's womb was as good as dead. But God wanted a baby named Isaac. And Abraham even got in the way and messed it up by having Ishmael with Hagar. But God had a plan for Isaac and Ishmael. But God.
The psalmist said, "My flesh, my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." Jesus said, with human beings, it's impossible. Even salvation is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. But God. Are you saying, but I? Or but God? But I can't. Oh, but God won't. Or, but God can. The answer you choose will determine the life you lead.